Welcome to our 9th episode of this series on the Gospel of John in Working the Word. A most fascinating chapter that sort of draws a line in John's Gospel.
We've been kind of in Galilee up until this point. Like, we've had sort of dips in and out of Jerusalem, but we're sort of changing location here.
He's been up and down, but there's radical changes taking place here. In this chapter 7, we're going to be looking at the Feast of Booths and the things that were associated with that. There's a discourse that Jesus gave about living water, and he causes quite a division among the people that are gathered around paying attention to what he's teaching.
He's a little bit good at that, to be fair.
But in this chapter, it's going to be called a division.
And it's actually kind of going to come to the head. There's no neutral positions here.
In fact, at this point, we're only 6 months away from the end of his ministry, 6 months away from the cross. And so we are in the point where
it's getting deep.
It's getting close. And so we begin after these things. And I guess that's the chapter before, isn't it?
We've just had disciples turning back. Peter, Lord, to whom would we go?
People grumbling about him. And that word's going to flow over into this chapter.
But it's an indeterminate period of time. John isn't particularly concerned with, here is a listing all of the things. He just kind of picks out the most important things.
And after these things, it's a phrase that's come up quite a few times.
Just moving on, basically.
Yeah. Jesus is walking in Galilee. And he's got a good reason for that. Last time he was in Jerusalem, which was chapter 5, he managed to upset them so that they wanted to kill him over the matter of the Sabbath.
Well, to be fair, fairly early on when he cleansed the temple, they were getting a little...
They were a little toey at that stage.
Yes.
But then when he healed the man at the pool of Bethesda, that was fine, except that he chose the wrong day. He should have done it a different day of the week, and they are still holding that against him. So it's simply he didn't want to go to Judea because the residents there, the Judeans, wanted to kill him.
We're not too receptive to him at that point.
So I'm going to say, well, look, that's
fair enough.
That's a fair enough reason. But now we have a feast coming along, the Feast of Booths.
And this is one of the big ones, one of the ones that everyone was expected to attend. So the lying low.
And it reminds them of the time when they lived in tents for 40 years as they were travelling from Egypt through to Canaan. And interestingly, of the time that God came and said, let them build me a tent that I can live among them.
There's sort of all sorts of, it's well worth exploring. There's a bunch of really interesting imagery to play with. They give up their home comforts and spend some time in a tent, which has the,
all the discomforts of camping.
But you've also got that layer that's almost, is it Philippians, I think? God did not, Jesus did not seek the...
Equality with God was something to be grasped.
But set it aside.
Made himself no reputation, took the form of a servant.
And so, this giving up his glory, just even giving up comforts and spending that time remembering that, it was designed to celebrate God's salvation. It was after the harvest and they were rejoicing that God had provided more than enough for the people that year. There's sort of lots of kind of interesting layers that when you're looking at what he's talking about in his ministry and significance with this feast. Like, the other writers don't talk about the feasts as much, but John is very intentional about bringing them up. And I think there is a specific point because we're supposed to be starting to see some of those connections.
And interestingly, this word booths or tabernacles is the same word that we had in chapter 1 and verse 14. And the word became flesh and tabernacled among us. So here is Jesus living in rough quarters, as it were, down here on earth.
And you've sort of, if particularly the first time he was there for a feast and the healing of the guy on Sabbath, if that hasn't sort of caused a stir, sort of turning up and bringing some new significance to the feast is...
And at that first one also we had Nicodemus came.
And he shows up in this story too.
He does. In verse 3, his brothers have some words with him.
I think John is also one of the ones where you actually hear the most from Jesus' family. We don't kind of hear from them as much in the other Gospels, whereas, back even around the wedding, after this he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, they're a lot more present here.
And they think that they're going to organise him. Okay. You need to depart from here and go to Judea, so that they have an agenda.
Well, if he is truly the Messiah, then clearly the best route is to go to Jerusalem and do the thing so that, it'll be recognised and the plan can proceed as far as they see it. Okay,
so that your disciples will see your works that you're doing. What was the last major miracle we had? He fed 5,000 people.
The thing is, though, that one wasn't sort of in the Jerusalem...
It wasn't, but his brothers think that it should be.
And I also find it interesting so that your disciples, who have been with him this whole time, so I'm wondering if by your disciples they mean, your subjects or something more.
Your followers. It's a Facebook term.
That, we'll see the works that you're doing, it sort of make it more public. And for the most part, Jesus isn't particularly concerned with making things public. Like, he will do things with crowds, but, a lot of the things, if it doesn't need to be, he won't make it.
But I wonder if the brothers' concept is, well, look, if we're down in Jerusalem, we're all camping out and he feeds the crowd, this is going to hurry along the whole process.
People are going to be a little bit easier to bring around.
A full stomach will come around much quicker than a set of ears. No one does anything in secret and himself seeks to be in public.
I mean, leaving aside, the point of the Messiah and whatnot, that logically speaking, that's a fair point. Like, if you want to be publicly known and don't actually do anything publicly, then it's not going to work. But in this case, the public wasn't the point.
It's the impact. And there's that little if over there. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. And there's almost echoes of the temptations of Christ in there. If you're the Son of God, perform this miracle.
And I mean, we do know that later on, at least some of his brothers very much become part of it. Like James, his brother, was the head of the church at Jerusalem for a while. So we know that they do kind of eventually catch up with the picture, but
at this stage, not even his brothers are believing.
To be fair, though, if they've grown up with, Jesus is like the brother and, we'd all have to take turn at dishes duty or whatever the equivalent was, it could be a little bit like, that prophet isn't recognised in his hometown, like in his home when you've watched him grow up and that's your brother. It could be a little bit harder again to see it from that perspective.
So here they want him to come with them, and I'm sure the whole journey down there is going to be one enormous parade. We're going to have a triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And all they are seeing is miracles. And in this chapter, we're going to have a contrast. Jesus isn't into miracles in this chapter. None are recorded. But what he is going to do is teaching, and it's almost teaching versus miracles. All right, so we're looking at the feasts.
We've had Passover a couple of times.
We've been to a number of Passovers, and that sort of marks a yearly cycle, doesn't it? Because they were the feasts of the first month of the year.
And this is essentially the last feast before we get back to
Passover again.
Passover.
So here we are in the 7th month. When we get round to the first month again, we've got the whole crucifixion, all of that stuff.
So, yeah, from basically John 7 till about 13 or 14 is essentially in that
We have
space.
more concentration of John's reporting on his teaching in this 6 months than the previous 3 years of his ministry.
And John's very much just doing highlights. But again, like, even with, there's the significance in the Feast of Booths for this. But again, all of these feasts are actually kind of putting into their story and having them reliving the story that they're pointing to. And Jesus is fulfilling a lot of those feasts. So it's kind of interesting to go through and look at some of the layers in them.
It is. And we've talked a little bit about what tabernacles commemorated. The time in the wilderness, the time living in tents. And as we've gone around this cycle over the 3 years of Jesus' ministry, Jesus has been moving around. He's been up and down, from up to Galilee, down to Jerusalem, up via Sychar to Galilee, back down to Jerusalem, back up to Galilee. And here we are. His brothers want him to go back down to Jerusalem.
I mean, as far as John's account, we know that he did do some things in those times that we don't have account of.
He did go some other places according to the Gospels, but this is his main up and down the country
as far as John,
John gives it to us. And in this chapter, Jesus is going to end up down in Jerusalem.
But not yet.
But not yet. Because when his brothers say, "Come on, let's go," Jesus says to them, "My time is not yet come."
Which kind of suggests that he knew exactly what they meant.
And that his time and their time were different. In fact, he's got the but there. You know? My time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. That Jesus is working with God's time, but for them, any time's good enough. And there's a little bit more discourse. So the world's not able to hate you, but it hates me. And this is not just a poor me discourse. But there's good reasons, because I bear witness concerning it, that its works are evil.
And this kind of a little bit sets up the tone for the rest of the chapter. But sometimes we can get caught into a little bit of a, baby Jesus, sweet, gentle, mild, and not kind of see that there is a fierceness in this love.
It's been well put in, maybe it fits here, that he comforted the afflicted. And a lot of his ministry, his working in miracles, has been comforting people who were suffering. But he also afflicted the comfortable. And lots of them lived down Jerusalem way. Because he picks them up on some of their attitudes. Their attitudes to sinners, their attitudes to the poor, their attitudes to a not navel-gazing religion.
Even just, that he wasn't willing to put up with inconsistencies. That even within how they lived and believed and practiced, the degree of hypocrisy. And we see a couple of bits where that sticks out a little bit later, but, that he wasn't willing to just kind of sit back and let the status be quo, because this needed addressing.
So he's not going to be part of their parade, which is, look, here we are, and we've brought our brother with us, and look at all the things that he can do. He says, "Go on, boys,
I'm sitting this one out.
You go to the feast. I'm not going up to this feast. My time has not yet been fulfilled. And that's going to cause us a little bit of a puzzle that we're going to want to think about in a moment or two. Where Jesus, look, I'm not going. And maybe that's I'm not going along with you. Certainly, some of the commentators down through the years have had problems with this.
Or there's been some of them, the translations have I'm not going down yet.
Okay. And maybe we can look at that. You know, the King James, the New King James, there's quite a family of them there that have I'm not going yet.
There's a whole bunch of sort of variants of interpretations as to kind of try and twist and make this work, because you have Jesus going, I'm not going, and then he also went up. Mm-hmm. Which doesn't sort of seem in character for what we expect. Is
he fickle? He doesn't know what he's doing?
Particularly seeing as though a big part of his focus is truth. Mm-hmm. It seems unusual.
So perhaps we need to practice some of what we taught back in Series 1, where we talked about how to read and understand the Bible. You know, what do we do when we strike something?
And there are always going to be these kind of discrepancies.
You know, I'm not going, I'm not yet going. They are very different. Mm.
But just because one, for example, I'm not yet going is more, makes more sense, based in the context, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right one.
Okay, so we've done a little bit of digging on this one. And there are some of the early manuscripts that have I'm not going, and there's some that have I'm not yet going. So we are actually looking at a difference in manuscripts. Some have one, some have the other. How do we decide? And most of the modern ones have come down with I'm not going. When scholars look at things like this that challenge us, they've got a number of criteria that they use to say, well, okay, how do we decide which one is most likely what Jesus actually said? And one of the things that they think about is, are copyists more likely to add a word?
Just to make it make a little more sense.
Make it make a little more sense, or to take a word out?
And generally it's add.
Are they likely to make it more problematic, or are they likely to smooth it out and make it less problematic? And what about the manuscripts? Which of the older manuscripts, what do they say? What's the geographic spread of each one? And which text family do they come up in? And if you've forgotten all about that, you may need to go back to Series 1 when we talked about text and translations. In this particular case, both go back a long way. Mm. But more of the older ones don't have it in. It's certainly...
Which, again, with the adding rather than deleting, even more the tend to smooth over the reading and make it less problematic.
This is less difficult. Mm. And they're maybe more likely. Certainly more of the early manuscripts have this, but there are one or two
that are early enough to be significant
that have that. So here it is. It's an issue. It's caused some challenges.
And I don't think it needs to be a big issue, but it's something to be noted just in terms of the human writers expressing the story of God in the best way they can. It doesn't necessarily mean it's perfect. But there's some interesting things to sort of dig over, and because a lot of the time with John, there's some very intentional reasons for why he's chosen to speak and use the words he has.
And he does actually explain why Jesus did this. So it almost makes it look like Jesus is wanting them, on your way, boys.
Well, if he said, I'll come later, they would have kind of gone, as essentially the John the Baptist preparing the way, like, look out, folks, he's coming soon.
And how do you avoid that kind of thing when there are those who, in their enthusiasm, actually make your job difficult? And so he leaves them, I think, with the understanding that he's not coming.
And I think that's what he needs them to understand.
Mm-hmm. But in the way that it's worded,
it's complicated.
I am is present. It's not I'm not going to be, but right now I'm not coming.
And it doesn't use anything of the future language. It's
all present tense.
There's almost I'm not coming with you.
Yeah. And that's clearly what they understood, but I think they, in their minds, understood he's not coming.
And I think he knew that that's what they understood, but didn't feel the need to correct them in this case. And my suspicion is the disciples actually go up with him as well.
With them or him?
With them, I suspect. Because, when we get down to verse 10, his brothers had gone up to the feast, but he went up not openly, but in secret. If you've got an entourage, going up in secret is difficult.
Yeah, that's true.
So if, the disciples particularly are kind of already in Jerusalem doing the good Jewish thing of being at the feast like they're supposed to be, they're there when he turns up. But if he turns up with his entourage, that's not sneaking in.
And his brothers certainly have an idea of the triumphal entry way too early.
And the other thing is, yes, it's a triumphal entry, but there's a lot more to it when it comes. It's not just sort of, this grand entrance into Jerusalem. There's a lot more significance in the way it pops up when it does.
And Jesus has some work still to do in Jerusalem.
Oh, yeah.
But really, this draws a line. That this is the end of Jesus' ministry in Galilee. He's been up and down Jerusalem to Galilee. This is the end. He will not go back to Galilee before the crucifixion.
I mean, he won't necessarily hang out specifically in Jerusalem the whole time, but in this area.
But he does have to move out of Jerusalem for his own well-being. So, meanwhile, down at the feast, his brothers have got there. The Jews are seeking him at the feast.
Well, everybody remembers what happens at the last one. I almost wonder if there's what's he going to do this time?
Or is this a continuation of Jesus didn't want to go because the Jews were seeking to kill him?
I think there's probably a degree of mixture because you have the term the Jews is used multiple ways in multiple places. Because you've got a lot of murmuring about him and you've got a variety. We've been asking who is this man? And this is almost the what do you think chapter because we've got a whole bunch of different perspectives represented here. We've got some murmuring about him saying he's good, some murmuring, no, he deceives the people. I almost feel like here the Jews seeking him could actually be a little bit more of a collective than just the Jewish leaders.
Yeah, the Judeans as opposed to the Galileans, perhaps. So they're a mixed lot. But interestingly, while they are having this under their breath conversation, no one is speaking publicly about him.
The Jews is an interesting, almost sub-character in the Gospel of John. But yeah, I do find it kind of interesting that it's kind of what everybody's talking about, but what nobody is talking about. Because everybody kind of knows that the leaders are not happy and they don't want to add their name to the bottom of that list.
And so you talk about him in quiet tones. It's clear that conversations were happening, but you didn't speak too loudly and too publicly.
And you kept an eye over your shoulder to make sure you knew who was listening.
And again, this is going to come up, this fear of the Jews. people being unwilling to actually take a position because of fear. And just flagging, we're going to meet this again in chapter 9.
We're going to read it a couple times, but like it's yes, fear as well, but it kind of shows you that you've got this alignment issue. That in theory, this is, this should have been the highway for, God among us kind of thing. And this is almost like what Jesus is doing is, it is really forcing them to choose. And there is a physical risk in choosing Jesus here. Like, we see a few times that, the Jewish leaders are out to kill him.
Even in this chapter.
And, it takes a lot to kind of sign your name under somebody who, the government is out to get. Like, that's a risky proposition.
He's not flavour of the month, and yet he's
the talk of the town, though.
The talk of the town. And with the Feast of Tabernacles, it's sort of assumed if you're not there at the beginning, because, this is a really good time.
This is a fun one.
Yeah. Day of Atonement, that was pretty serious. But Tabernacles, it's almost a continuous 8-day party.
Pretty much. And if it was somebody just sort of a joyful festival, everybody would assume that the Feast of Booths is what you meant, because it's the fun one. It's the one you want to be there for.
But Jesus doesn't show up until the middle. And the feast being in the middle, Jesus just goes up to the temple.
I mean, if you're trying to avoid being noticed and harassed by the Jewish leaders, the temple's maybe not.
On the other hand, maybe the safe place is in the temple where all the people are.
There's an element of both, I think. But one of the things that I find is interesting, the Jews were marveling, and it's not kind of, oh, isn't he great? It's more like an astonishment at the audacity. Like, even how does one know such things not having studied? Like, for one, you've got this, the making of a rabbi kind of involved that you apprenticed under another rabbi until you were sufficiently practiced in his teachings, and then you would go on, and there was sort of, these almost lineage.
So it's like Paul studied under Gamaliel.
And you've got this guy coming up teaching like a rabbi who hasn't had that training, and there's an audacity in that. But we've also got almost 3 categories of people here. You've got the people going, he's good, and the people going, no, he deceives people. He's not good. And then people going, how does he know such things? Like, kind of getting distracted and caught up on something that's not the point. Like, it's an excuse.
And his big focus here is teaching. He's not working miracles. And what's he teaching? He doesn't tell us. John doesn't record it, except Jesus is there, heart and central almost of the Jewish faith.
And you get him actually in this instance responding to basically each of these groups. Like, his answer kind of talks to all of them.
Okay, so Jesus answers this question. You ought to answer a question. And what was the question? How does this one know such writings having not studied?
And if we're looking at the traditional way of becoming a rabbi and, that kind of study thing, when we're talking about, it's not of myself, but the one having sent me, that's still a familiar framework. It's just kind of like, my rabbi is better than your rabbi, kind of.
Or more to the point, who is the one who sent me? And that's a key question.
And it's almost like, in that he isn't speaking for himself. If he was just speaking for himself, it'd be a lot easier to discredit him.
But he's making a claim, I am speaking for God.
And they are absolutely clear on that claim. Because, the emotional of how they're reacting to, they know what he's saying.
But he digs a little bit deeper. If anyone desires to do his will, he will know concerning the teaching, whether it's from God, let's not mess around it. It's either from God or I'm speaking from myself.
And I think there's this sense that, if you knew your scriptures really well and if you had a close relationship with God, this would be really obvious to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If anyone wants to do God's will, he will know the teaching, whether it's from God or whether I speak from myself. The one speaking from himself seeks his own glory.
Which we've sort of had earlier, and the brothers are kind of, come and be glorious. And Jesus is sort of going, this is almost giving an explanation that I'm not doing it that way.
I'm not here for show and tell. Well, I'm here to tell, but not to show. I've done that. And when he's done these miracles, it hasn't caused him to believe. So now, let's think about his teachings. And the one seeking the glory of the one having sent him, he is true.
It's sort of there's nothing in it for him, kind of. And realistically, there isn't. He's not going to get kind of...
He's putting his neck on the line.
Literally.
This is going to...
Like, he's definitely not seeking the comfortable route.
The popular route. And no unrighteousness is in him. A preposterous claim, if it's not true.
Well, it's back to that. Either he's very, very bad or very, very good. There's not a lot of middle ground here.
Mm-hmm.
I find this one funny, actually, because, has not Moses given you the law and none of you keep the law? Why do you seek to kill me? And the crowd's like, you have a demon. Who seeks to kill you? Nobody questions none of you keep the law. Like, that's
what you would think they would defend.
That's a little bit offensive, really. Like, I keep the law. I've kept them since childhood. What are you saying? But, none of them address that at all. They're just sort of, wait, who's trying to kill you? What?
You have a demon. And isn't it interesting that if you disagree with someone, rather than deal with what they're saying, you call them names?
Although I kind of find it interesting that we almost have a bit of a parallel, because later in the chapter... You're going to have the Pharisees going, this crowd not knowing the law is accursed. So you've almost got a degree of they're unwittingly agreeing.
Tricky. And so Jesus digs into it, and he knows they are still smarting about that healing of the man by the pool of Bethesda on the Sabbath. They are thinking he should have come on Friday or Sunday, but he did it on the Sabbath when it could have been done on another day of the week.
And it's interesting that, that one, he said, I did one work and you all marvel. Like, all of this is based on that one thing. Like, breaking the Sabbath in such an audacious way is like...
And 6 months later, they still haven't got over it.
They still haven't got over it.
And so... he takes their patron saint, their favourite prophet, Moses. And their identifying mark, circumcision. And he's like, Moses gave you circumcision. Well, actually, he didn't. The fathers, that was Abraham, well before Moses.
But that's not the point. Moving on.
But also on the Sabbath, you circumcise a man.
Well, it was considered that the command to circumcise was so critical that it's to do with identity, that it overrides the Sabbath command.
And in fact, the rabbis said that a positive command overrode a negative one. So a command that told you to do something overrode one that said don't. And
there's almost echoes here of the, I think it's Matthew, where he's, talking about being Lord of the Sabbath. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. That sense of being it is lawful, we often see that as, it's within the constraints of the law, it's okay to do. But you've almost got this sense here where, the deeds of mercy aren't an overriding or a applicable part of the law, but it's a fulfillment of the law. Like, doing good on the Sabbath is law. It is doing the law.
And so he picks up, look, if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses might not be broken, Why are you angry with me because I made a man entirely sound on the Sabbath? You know, you're jumping to conclusions. You're judging by appearances.
And we almost have the implication here, like, you know, do not judge according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. That it all pretty much implies that judging on outward appearance is very unrighteous. Like that's sort of the logical implication
That's
here.
what he seems to be implying here.
And kind of asking them to question how they judge. Like it's not sometimes we misapply the do not judge thing. But it's sort of asking them to think, what are your standards and what are you judging on here? And I think it's an ongoing thing to sort of keep in mind and reflect, like, you know, what does judging righteous judgment look like now?
And do we sometimes focus on the negatives and we neglect all the things that we should be doing while we're not doing the things that we don't do?
Or even focusing on the things that are kind of good in neglect of the things that are better. Because, you know, the outward appearance, you know, this one looks to be the right one, even if it isn't necessarily the one you're actually supposed to be doing.
Well, he gets a reaction on this one. Because there are some who are listening and are saying, look, isn't this the one that they want to kill?
Which is going to be kind of interesting because they're going to be there and they're going to hear this going on and having the people murmuring that, wait, you know, isn't this the one they wanted to kill? They're not doing anything, I guess. Maybe they believe.
Here he is in the temple.
And that's not going to help their blood pressures any.
You know, could it be that the rulers have recognised that this is the Messiah? This is not what the rulers...
This is kind of a Mayday train going way off the tracks kind of moment for the rulers.
But we know this man. We know where he's from. But the Christ, the Messiah, whenever he may come, no one knows where he's from. His brothers are in town.
You've almost got Jesus responding to do you act like, you know, he says, you know me and you know where I'm from. But we don't get any inflection there. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, he could well have said, so you know me and where I'm from. Okay.
Really?
Because, you know, you've had this sense of mystery there, and there's a bit of assumed knowledge in this point, and a couple of points here, because we're also going to come later to going, you know, but we know where he's from, and nothing comes from, no prophet comes from Galilee, and John is sort of assuming, you know, this. I think it's a little bit later on here. It's like, but he'll come from Bethlehem. It can't be him. This guy comes from Galilee. And John just sort of, he doesn't touch it. Like the readers know this. I don't need to.
Yes.
And I think this is one of those cases.
But Jesus dives right back in. I have not come of myself, but the one have sent me.
He's kind of been on this point for a couple chapters now.
We have. That this maybe is one of the key things. Who Jesus is very closely tied to who sent him. And if he really has come from the Father, then
that's a fairly key point.
And something very bad to reject.
And again, we're getting to this point where you cannot remain neutral.
Well, he's really digging it in at the end of 28. The one having sent me is true, whom you do not know.
But I know. Like claiming that intimate knowledge of God is...
In the presence of the temple, the priests...
Them's fighting words.
Them's dividing words that people have to come to a decision who Jesus is for themselves.
And it's also... There's going to have to be a little bit of getting over yourself at this point, because at this point they think they are in connection with God. They think they know him. And Jesus is going, I know him in an intimate way and you don't.
And we're 6 months out from the crucifixion. It says that he's not rushing them into the decision. He's putting it out there for them to cogitate on. And one would hope that 6 months of thinking you would come to some sort of reason. But at this point, they've got one thing on their mind.
How dare you say that?
Yeah, get him. But no one laid hand on him. They wanted to.
I think there's a degree, though, of just like, okay, the leaders themselves don't ever look like they're trying to get other people to do it for them, and that's fairly unsuccessful. But there's sort of almost a like, well, we want to, but somebody else do it first.
If we do it, then we're going to look bad in the eyes of the crowd.
And just in case, like there's a bit of a hedging bets as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, out of the crowd, and crowd may be different to Judean.
You've got some interesting mix of the way that the terms are used. But there's no evidence in this at all that their faith is anything other than genuine.
Yeah, and it's not they believed him, they believed in him.
Like, it's a little, in places it's a little incomplete, but, even faith based on signs is still faith. Mm-hmm. It's got some growing to do, but...
And their line is, when the Messiah comes, will he do more signs than this man has done?
How much more do you want, almost?
It's almost like some of these are from Galilee. They've seen feeding of 5,000 and...
What more do you want?
Yeah.
But you've got the Pharisees in the crowd here.
Okay, John is playing the Pharisees and the crowd off against each other.
And I kind of feel often that the Jews and the crowd are almost sort of a player one sense here, that John's giving the readers space to move around within these groups of people and find themselves. And if their question is, who is this guy? Then, you've got Jesus able to actually directly respond to that. Mm-hmm. There's kind of space to move around here and explore. And I think that's, John's purpose is giving you space to explore who is this character. And John is giving you space to do that wherever you are.
But at the same time, they have their thugamists who they can send out to bring anybody in that they want to.
We'll get an update on that soon.
We'll get a report from these men a little bit later on. But they send them out to get hold of him.
And Jesus jumps into his next discourse.
Which almost changes the time. Just a little time I am with you, and I go to the one having sent me. Mm-hmm. Still on that tune. You will seek me and not find me. And where I am, you're not able to come.
And again, we have a little bit of the above-below thinking in this one. Because, they sort of immediately assume the, where's he going to go? Is he going to go into Gentile or whatever?
Yeah, is he going to go up to Turkey, Asia Minor, over into Greece? Maybe he's heading for Rome or Saudi Arabia?
But you've also got, there's a right at the beginning of Proverbs, 24-ish and on. Since you rejected me when I called and gave no heed when I stretched out my hand, since you ignored all my advice and would not accept my rebuke. This is the kind of thing we're setting up for. We get to 28, they will call to me, I will not answer. They will look for me, but will not find me, since they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord. There's a few places in the Old Testament where it talks about that they will look for me, but not find me. And so again, if these are, good little Old Testament equivalent.
They've been to synagogue.
This language is going to. I remember that there's something familiar about that, because there's a couple of places in the Old Testament where you have they will seek me but not be able to find me.
So he's actually not given them something that they can get straight away. They've given them something that's going to swirl around for a little while.
He does that a bit.
Give them cause to think and give them time to think.
But he also, we also get them sort of working through, what's he saying, and asking questions. And this is one of the things that John does a bit, I think, using the crowd asking questions to be able to give Jesus another opportunity to go a little bit deeper. Mm-hmm.
And he's not going to miss this one.
No, he's not.
Because we know we're here at the Feast of Booths, and in the last day of the feast, the great day, this is day 8. This is the day you pack up and go home. Jesus stood up and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink."
Which comes into particular significance when remember that we're at the Festival of Booths, because one of the key parts of that festival was the priests would come down to the pool of Siloam, I believe it was.
Yeah, and there was not just the priests, it was a procession.
But you'd have the priest filling the golden pitcher from its waters. And the waters actually flowed from underneath the temple. So you've got this water flowing out from underneath the temple.
Yep. So it actually begins up at the pool of the spring Gihon, which is down, probably this isn't going to work. No. Round about there, but down on the ground level, down the bottom of the hill.
Yeah.
Yep. The spring Gihon, and Hezekiah's tunnel went in and around and down and came out just down here at the pool of Siloam.
And you've almost got a layer of significance there that, the water that flowed from underneath the temple is now sourced from the new temple, which, is imagery we've had before. Then they'd go back to the temple and pour it out at the base. And I kind of find it interesting because the prayer that they would pray as they were pouring it out was something to the equivalent of, "Please God, save us, hear our prayer, rescue us." And you've kind of got Jesus going, "Guys, I'm here. Hi, I'm right here."
If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink.
Like, again, we've got the Isaiah 55, "Come to me, all you who are thirsty." It's not new, but Jesus is kind of really nailing it where it's, this is the ceremony that they're part of, and Jesus is kind of, bringing that layer out.
It points to me, the one believing in me. As the scripture has said, out of his belly will flow rivers of living water.
And I kind of find it interesting here that we've had in the last, their big thing is Moses, and Jesus kind of keeps, referring to the Moses.
Mm-hmm.
In the last chapter, we've had Jesus, the bread of life, which they're a bit grumbly about. We had Moses giving the manna in the desert. Here, then last chapter, we had Jesus as the bread of life. We had Moses giving them water. We've got Jesus as the living water here. In the next chapter, we're going to have Moses had the pillar of fire. In the next chapter, we're going to have Jesus as the light of the world. Jesus is really deliberately drawing a whole bunch of these parallels to kind of try and get them to see what the point it was all directed to in the first place was.
And it's interesting, this living water is also a theme that he brought up with the woman at the well. Mm-hmm. So it's a recurring theme. And
there's a degree of, the water from the rock as well.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of the gushing out. We've got a lot of the not
and
yet here as well.
That rock had to be hit.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a lot of layers that that come together a little bit more the longer you think.
Putting some foundations in.
Yeah.
In a way that's going to be memorable.
It's a bit sleeper though. Like you kind of hear it and go, I'm going to have to think about that a little bit.
And the sleeper is going to arise a little bit later on.
Well, right back at the beginning, we had John, a couple of things going, but his disciples remembered this after his resurrection. Mm-hmm. And the implication is, and actually finally understood what he meant.
But John at this point does also give some commentary. That he said this concerning the Spirit, whom those having believed in him were about to receive. For the Spirit was not yet given because Jesus was not yet glorified. They had Jesus among them. And while the Spirit was active, not in the way that he was from Pentecost, which is another one of the feasts.
Yeah, and it's that's again a big transition point. But there's this, we come to it a little bit later, but unless I go, the Spirit can't come. Mm-hmm. And John is writing this from the perspective of in the future where Jesus has already gone, has already been glorified, has already gone, the Spirit has come. Like this is retrospectively looking back and sort of anchoring that sort of how this
possibly
works.
Looking back 60 years. And we get a result, as we always do. There's a narrative, a discourse, and then a response. And having heard these words, some of the people were saying, this is the prophet, this is the one Moses talked about. Others saying, this is the Messiah. And others were saying, surely the Christ doesn't come out of Galilee. Has not the scripture said that Christ comes out of the seed of David and from Bethlehem, the village where David was?
Again, John just pretty much assumes, the readers already know this, I don't need to go into it. But again, we've got kind of this, correct knowledge, but sort of inadequate.
But they know the scripture, but they haven't made inquiry to say, he comes from Nazareth, doesn't he? Well, actually, ignorance can be very...
I find it interesting because it's not that long ago, this sort of, but we know where he's from. Clearly not so much.
Suddenly we discovered that they didn't know where he was from.
But we've got some people, this is the prophet, some people, this is the Christ, and some people going, wait, this guy's from the wrong spot. We've kind of got almost that group of three different types of people. It's correct, but they don't sort of have incomplete knowledge. You've got correct, but kind of uncommitted. And then you've got the rejected because excuse that has nothing to do with it, really.
And we have a division.
And knowing, yes, I think a division is an orderly way of putting it. Because if you've got, some wanting to seize him, that's not just sort of I disagree with you, but we can just, that's cool. You think differently, I think differently. That's fine.
This is not that kind
This is not that kind of a division.
This is, you're not only wrong, but you're bad, and you're so bad you don't deserve to live. But no one laid hands on him.
And we've had a couple of points in this chapter where they've wanted to but haven't.
And at this point, the officers come back.
Reporting back for...
They came to the chief priests and Pharisees and said, why didn't you bring him? That's what we sent you for.
I actually find this a really fascinating response because, there's sort of never has this man spoken like this, as this man speaks. It's they could have just kind of, there were crowds, we didn't want to, they could have given an excuse. They're sticking their necks out here. They know that the Pharisee,
they have been listening.
And this is sort of, these are essentially the temple officers, which are going to be, as far as I can tell, from the tribe of Levi.
This is the local secret police almost.
And they're sticking their necks out here.
We listen, and his sermons are...
This guy's not bad. Have you heard him?
It's almost suggesting his sermons might be better than some of...
But there's no apology. There's no, sorry, I know you sent us out to do the thing and we didn't do the thing. It's just but this guy's, nobody speaks like him.
Which is almost like, where did this man learn this, having never been to our school?
But you there's almost came out to do the job and just sort of got distracted. Actually, this is interesting. Let's just sit and listen for a little bit first.
And the more they listened, the more they...
were less inclined to do their job.
Took it in. And obviously there was a division among them too. And the response is, have you been deceived also? Have any of the rulers or Pharisees believed on him?
Which, spoiler, couple sort of secretly.
Well, wait till we get to the next verse.
Yes, but we've also got this sense of, that we're the authority and we don't, so nobody else, anybody else who does is clearly misinformed. And when we get to verse 49, John's almost just, there's almost a chuckle that John has here. Because it's kind of like they think they're, but this crowd not knowing the law are accursed. And John's almost saying it like this crowd not knowing the law are accursed.
And then to answer that question, have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed on him? Next verse, Nicodemus.
Again, we sort of have a little bit of a tentative. I think he, at this point, concludes that, these guys aren't really in the mood for a rational discussion. Let's just drop it and come back to it later.
On a technicality.
On a technicality. But, it was a relatively safe legal challenge, really. But I find it interesting that they've just gone, this crowd not knowing the law are accursed. And Nicodemus is like, guys, doesn't our law judge that a man first, doesn't our law not judge a man until it's heard from him? So basically they're going from the crowd doesn't know the law to breaking the law.
And he's suggesting that these guys don't know the law either.
Breaking the law. And I kind of suspect that some tempers are a little bit high at this point, because they then go on to sort of snap back at him. They answered and said to him, "Are you not also of Galilee? Search and see that a prophet is not raised out of Galilee." Now, if we're doing some fact checking, Jonah was from Galilee, kind of a prophet. There's a couple other ones we suspect. Nahum, we can't really pin it down, or we know that he was an Elkoshite, which we don't actually know where that was now. But the town of Capernaum literally means village of Nahum. So there's kind of a good chance, that may have been where the Elkoshites were, and it was renamed from, this is where Naaman was born.
But the moment you say Jonah is from Galilee,
and we've got
you've got at least one exception.
At least one, probably two, and they're going to know this. But I kind of feel like in the heat of the moment,
and we're back to our Bethlehem thing too. Have they?
If they've done their research, but yeah, we've got this. I kind of feel like they're not being their best, thoughtful, rational selves at this point.
And that's a human problem, isn't it? And the best thing when you're not your rational self is to go home, to take some time out.
And yeah, I think Nicodemus sort of goes, guys, that sticks his neck out just a little bit, but goes, you know what, this is not the time and place. That they're not open to negotiation here. We'll come back.
And while they went home, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Now, in our next episode, we're going to discover that when they went home, it wasn't to sleep. It was to set a trap. And really, the challenge is there. Who is Jesus? Can we get him into a corner? Can we find a reason not to believe? And
I think realistically, they catch themselves in their trap, which is pretty much what they do all the time. But we've kind of had this very much, almost a who do you say I am to the crowd. And they're having to kind of work through it. And the Pharisees are really trying to stack the odds, but it's not working. But I kind of almost feel like the further they go, the more they're fighting this.
They're digging a hole. They're setting a bomb, but it's going to go off in their hands.
And there's no kind of actual questioning, could this? It's this couldn't be, thereby we have to kind of, everything else is based around he can't be, rather than going, hang on, let's just step back and fact check a little bit here. Let's think about this, reflect, see if it does actually work. There's no, he's upset them, and while kind of in that emotional state, they're acting that way rather than actually sitting back and listening and thinking.
And that sounds very contemporary.
Does a little.
So, where are we going with this? We invite you to join us next week as we see what this trap is and how it all goes dreadfully wrong for those who set it.
Do feel free to read ahead, though.
Do read ahead so that you're ready to join us next week as we continue to work the word.